Clem, it's such a pleasure to have you on.
It's good to meet you, and yeah, it's great to be on, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
I am as well, and it's really an honor to when you have a musician that you really appreciate and you listen to all the time, and then you're able to talk to in person. It's really something where people decry the state of technology and social media today. But if I'm not mistaken, I found out about you through I was watching maybe a show and I heard a song I liked. Of course, I pull out my phone and I press the Shazam button. I get the song, which is incredible to me to this day that Shazam can do that. I then start listening to your music, and then I just on a whim decided to reach out to you, and it's really cool that you're coming on.
Well, props to Shazam because being able to tell what ambient music you can, yeah, being able to tell the difference between one ambient song and another one, that's quite a task. So yeah, thanks to Shazam for putting us together, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned ambient. I'm actually really interested. I saw on your website that you say that you specialize in modern classical and ambient soundscaping, and that you take inspiration from your surroundings and experiences that have guided your life. What exactly is ambient soundscaping, and how did you kind of come into that style of music?
That's a good question. So I mean, I tend to place myself in different genres. I'm very sporadic with my music, so I don't tend to fit into kind of a nice, neat box. However, um, when it comes to the influence behind my music, a lot of it comes, like you said, from my natural surroundings. I've happened to have moved around a fair bit, at least in the last few years. So that really helps to feed into my music. And like I said, it's very sporadic for me. It obviously, like most music, it comes from what I'm feeling at any given moment. So yeah, I mean, I can move from piano to just straight piano to some ambient guitar sounds, using found sounds, so sounds from the city, sounds from
Hmm.
nature, and that helps to drive my music. So it depends on the setup I've got and where I am, as to what tools I have to make the music. So that helps too. But yeah, I mean, I can move from all sorts of different genres. Sometimes within the same album, which people say, what's your identity in this? How did you get from here to here? And yeah, it's just kind of visceral the way I write my music. I will take what I'm feeling at any given time and try and translate that the best I can. So yeah.
That's beautiful. I was researching in the Bible, in the Torah. Where's the first place that we find music? And in Genesis 4:20, it says that Yuval was he was a shepherd, and that he was the father of all who grasp the lyre and the flute. So that's our first reference that we find. And I thought it was very interesting that he was a shepherd, because the idea of being in solitude and reflection that comes through being in the vastness of nature, as we were speaking about earlier. I feel like it can help you bring out your inner music. It helps you, um, you know, the gentleness and the wonder of music can maybe and the quietness and solitude can help you surface what's inside that's usually drowned out maybe by outer noise. Have you found inspiration from, I know that you grew up in a beautiful nature area of England. How has nature itself had an impact on your music?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some ways it's conscious and some ways it's subconscious. So, you are made up of all of your experiences, and that tends to come out maybe in a subconscious way. But in terms of the conscious way, I approach putting nature into my music. It's about the landscapes I grew up with. You know, uh, like here it's a nice autumn day here. I'm in Chicago at the moment, but like you said, I grew up in England, as you can hear. So autumn leaves on a day, long walks, things like that tend to be synonymous with my own experiences in childhood, and so I use those as kind of representations. There's also there's a difference between going for a walk on a bright sunny day, or being driving home in the night in the wooded areas and it being dark and having a completely different feeling. So
Mm.
I've tried to put that into my music as well. Yeah, and I think using things like guitar and using different types of methods, a lot of reverb, things like that, tend to be quite evocative. And the sort of style of music I tend to write, does tend to evoke emotions, at least from me, about where I've come from and the experiences I've had. So I kind of match the two in terms of genre of music and the experiences I've had. And it just seems the most natural way, not pun intended, but natural way to express myself and express where I've come from.
Beautiful. And you touched upon your experiences, not just the outer world, nature evoking the music in you, but also your personal experiences. And the other shepherd I was thinking about was King David. King David was known as like the sweet singer of Israel. And far from being just somebody who was, a shepherd peacefully in the pastures, it was called an ish milchama, a man of war. He was somebody who led a nation. He struggled immensely. His own son tried to kill him. He didn't have it very peaceful in his life. But I wonder also that maybe that constant struggle and all those tests and challenges that he had, that personal struggle helped him bring out. He wrote 150 poems, psalms. He used to play the harp to calm King Saul and to wake up the Jerusalem in the morning. So, have you found it not easy, but have you been able to pull from your personal experiences and challenges when writing music and creating music?
Yes, although I find that some ways it's easier in hindsight to say that. You kind of look back and say, oh, that was the meaning of this piece, or that's what this sounded like. It was again, this goes back to the subconscious nature of how how anyone works, I suppose. So you can be in the moment and writing something at that time, but then look back and think, oh, that was really meaningful in this way, and it does actually sound like this. And obviously naming something helps, and writing about it helps. That adds an extra element to that. As any musician will do, is write about their music or speak about their music, and it puts everything in context. Um, so so yeah. Yeah, I mean that's kind of how the meaning derives from my music, and how I feel about the experiences, and how it's kind of placed within the context of my life as well. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you're saying in hindsight, looking back, maybe that you touched on it, but when you're actually creating the music itself, it's more of just a natural creative flow, and you're not quite sure where it's coming from. And I'm fascinated by that subject because it's not just in music, but in new ideas. The question is, where does this new insight come from? Where does creativity come from? And Kabbalah talks about the one of the highest faculties in the soul is called chokhmah, which is usually translated as wisdom or intuition. When you think about intuition or trusting your gut feeling or the light bulb over the head in a cartoon character where the new insight comes in, it really is coming from almost a higher place. Like we don't really know where its source. It's like a mysterious thing. Do you In order for you to get into a place in yourself when you're able to create music from scratch, which is a pretty mind-boggling concept out of the blue, do you have to do any preparation or you just sit down with some of your favorite instruments and go at it?
That's a good question. I suppose you're limited by the tools that you've got in some ways, and I find personally that the more limited I am, the more creative I tend to be.
Mm,
If you give yourself too much choice in life, it tends to stymie a lot of what you're doing. And I've found as my kind of career has progressed, in some ways that's inhibited what I'm doing because I have more choices to make, and I have, you have more in-depth knowledge of the music industry and what's expected of you. So I think at least going back to my early stuff, I was quite limited in what I had. So that definitely played into to how I created. It's interesting you say the light bulb moment. That's very interesting. I suppose that comes from pure enthusiasm as well. Is that you're enthusiastic, especially when you're just starting to write music, and you're learning as you go. That's always a kind of a more magical experience because you're picking up things, and you're new to it, and you're also developing your own working method and how you approach things. And so, I always feel that when I first started is kind of that pure light bulb moment that you were talking about. It's almost pure inspiration. You absorb a lot of the music you've listened to, which makes sense to you, and you understand where people, where other musicians are coming from, and you derive meaning from it. So that feeds into your work. And there are different working methods that come along with a specific genre in music. So I started with mostly ambient guitar, and then I played the violin badly when I was younger, so I just kind of added that into some of my original work, and it just kind of flowed from there. And I kind of used my pure inspiration that I had to create something. It's a little bit more methodical these days, just because you already have a body of work. So the workload, the working method has changed slightly, because in some ways there are certain expectations of what your music should sound like already, because you already have a body of work. So in some ways now it's about making small changes to your given sound or your music, in order to progress it. So it's just a different stage. So I suppose it just the answer to that question, I suppose it depends where you are in your journey, as to the impetus that goes into what you're making at any given time, and how it's translated in your music. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the mystics talk about first light, second light. That the first light is we're given an inspiration from above to start a new journey in some direction. And it's almost like a gift from above. We haven't really earned it. It's just like this inspiration that comes. And then there's a long period of no light or illumination where we ourselves are creating through our efforts. And then we reach what's called a second light, which is less exciting, but it's more real and tangible and created and earned, kind of like a relationship where you have
Right.
the romance period and then the work, and then you reach a more settled place that's more real, but maybe less fireworks in the sky. Um,
It
and
becomes a more incremental and meaningful change, right? I think
Absolutely, and
that
it's more real than because those phases can go. Some people have the fireworks; they might have a 3 month music career, put out a song or something, and that's it. And I guess there were musicians who died young, or they really went hard for a short time of inspiration. And um, but look, I'm very thankful that you went on that path, because I've not only enjoyed your music, but it's actually some of the few. I have a meditation playlist, and that style of music you do to me is a rarefied tier of music, in that it I find there's a lot of noise in life, and it's not just noise outside. Let's say you shut off the noise, you close your windows and your doors, and you're alone. We have inner noise. We have a lot of like anxieties and worries and stresses and talking in our heads. And I find that music, especially ambient music, it helps uh, almost silence that noise. It hits it and it allows you to drop into a deeper place personally. And I don't know how you feel when you listen to music, or when you listen to your own music, or when you compose. If you feel like it takes you to another place, or an untapped place that you don't usually reach during your day. What's it like for you?
Wow, that's a that's a tough question to answer. I suppose it depends on the type of music, what I'm listening to. I tend to there tends to be, when I'm listening to music, there's suddenly kind of a moment that, as with nowadays, you can put on playlists and you can put on things, and stream until your heart's content, which is what most people do nowadays, and that's great. I mean, that gives exposure to lots of different people. But I just find that, there's a moment in one particular piece that I suddenly think, oh, this is really great, and that's kind of the most emotional part of listening to music for
Yes.
me. I'll then go and explore that artist and find out what they're doing, and in some ways I'm a little bit more analytical. I will break down what they're doing, which is useful to me. I know why I like something. There's lots of areas in my life that I'm enjoying something just for the sake of enjoying something, and I don't necessarily think of it in an intellectual sense. But when it comes to music, it tends to be a little bit more intellectual, because I'm trying to, in some ways, break it down. But there is that initial period that even with your own music, you're writing it and you think, oh yeah, I really like this. I really like this. Even though it's kind of your own music, you're enjoying it for the first time. So, with my own music, it tends to be that I'll write it and then I'll kind of put it aside for a while, and then it comes down the line 5 years later and you listen to it again, almost like you're listening to it the first time, and you think, oh, actually, that's I like I like this because this is what I did, or when you're creating something, it tends to be that you're listening things over and over again, and it kind of wears on you a bit. But interestingly, when I'm listening to other people, if I like a given song, I will put it on repeat for probably a whole day. So
Uh,
that's the great paradox about it, is that I get tired of my own music when I'm writing it, but then when I like something else, I will put it on repeat and I will listen to it over and over and over again. And if you look at my my Spotify, for instance, you'll see that this song was played 105 times in the space of about 2 days. So and that still is a meaningful connection. So I suppose I connect with music in multiple ways, and then you kind of start to break it down analytically, and then kind of put it aside in your box of music that you like to listen to or that you go back to. And I think the way in which people consume music is different as well nowadays. So, and even as a musician, that's changed me. I don't think I've bought as much music recently. It tends to be more streaming. So in some ways, the consumption of music has changed, and so your relationship with music changes as a
mm,
musician, which in some ways is great. There's more music out there, and it's for any streaming service or whatever, which is how most people will listen to it. YouTube, it makes the music more accessible. You pay a certain fee, and then you're able to access all this great music. And then, but from when I started 10 years ago, it was slightly different. We were more about the physical product, and the storytelling element is still there. So you're able to connect with that as a musician to other musicians. But yeah, it's changed. So I suppose in some ways the listening pattern has changed as well. So
like
maybe
like people had an album that they would maybe play and lie on their bed and go through the progression of this album, whereas now they might jump song here, a song there from a different album, and not really go through the progression.
yeah, yeah. I would certainly say that. And in some ways that's you know I always write music within the context of the rest of my music. But that's, if people connect with music in a sporadic way, then that's okay. That's it may work for some people. It may not. So I guess nowadays we have more options to listen to music. We're still producing physical albums. I just released a vinyl with a collaboration, so I'm still making physical music and developing the artwork, and that's something that's hugely important. But also the streaming element allows people to listen to it. So I know I've kind of veered off topic here, but I suppose when I'm listening to other people's music, I do get that initial feeling of enthusiasm about the music and inspiration, and then I kind of pick it apart a bit. Yeah, I suppose it's different for lots of people. So it's interesting, and people do connect with my music in a way I wouldn't think of. So they describe things to me that is important in their life, or that it reminds them of, and that sort of changes my interpretation of my own music as well, because I see it in a different light. So the world is a complicated place, and we don't deal with everything in a very uniform way, but that's great, and it all kind of plays into the way I personally interpret my own music and other people's music. So yeah,
I totally was smiling. I was resonating when you said that you listen analytically, even if you love the song. Because, like, as a rabbi, when I hear a speaker or rabbi that says something brilliant that inspires me, half of my mind is appreciating it, and the other half is almost taking notes as to how it was delivered, what was said. I'm in that same mode when I hear in my world something that I find inspiring. Sometimes I just want to let go and dissolve into the enjoyment of the moment, and other times I'm thinking of how the analytical brain is working. um, I think it's also beautiful what you mentioned about how people tell you what they feel, because when you were writing the music and composing it, or creating it, your intention may have been one thing, but it's almost like you are a channel for this music, and you put it out there, and everyone's going to interpret it and connect to it in their own unique way. Can I ask you about just a one song as an example, because I'm curious to see how your process goes. So, "Bless Those Tired Eyes"
Hmm.
is one of my favorites, and I also find it interesting that many people find certain songs, they gravitate to certain songs from an artist, even though we're all different humans. I don't think it's just popular culture that it got clicked up more and people. No, there's certain songs maybe by artists that will pull people towards it. What was your, if from what you recall, what was your creative process like for a song like that? And even the name, I'm curious how you come up with the name for a song.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think the name is evocative, and that kind of helps people understand the piece. I think that's one large element nowadays, especially if you're kind of clicking through listening to music and you see that it's called "Bless Those Tired Eyes," and you can derive lots of different meanings from that. So in some ways, that's kind of a savvy title on my part. And that was actually that was so when my then girlfriend, now wife, visited me when I was back in the UK. There was one day that she just arrived, and she was incredibly tired with jet lag, as as most people get. And we went to the pub and we had a drink with some of my friends, and she clearly looked tired and felt tired, but she was there, and she travelled all day, and she came to spend time with my friends, and that meant a lot to me. And when I looked at her, I thought, oh, bless those tired eyes, because she's been travelling all day, and she's there. She hasn't fallen asleep. She's engaged with my friends, and she's doing something that's incredibly important to me. So that's kind of where the title came from. I think the piece was written before that, but again, hindsight as well. You look back and you think, well, that's the right piece title for that piece at that given time. So, but it just seems that title connects with a lot of people. When it comes to the writing of the song, it's mostly guitar, and then some kind of ambience in the background. And there's a lot more that goes into those kind of the background than you'd first think. There's a lot of sculpting and molding, and it takes a good while to make something sound less synthetic, because it's very easy to make this kind of wishy-washy sound that ends up sounding synthetic, and you have to kind of steer away from that. So that's a mark of my music I've always found important, is to make it sound more natural, and then maybe that goes back to the nature sounds, or the way I grew up. But it seems that a mark of my music tends to be that in some ways people can't discern what those sounds are. They don't initially think, oh, well, that's this or that's that. It's just kind of a sound in itself, and it's almost like a natural sound. And then obviously there's some guitar over the top, which is fairly simple. I tend to be very sporadic when I write my music. I'll sit down, I'll write it, and I will likely record it that day. So a lot of my pieces will be recorded within hours of me writing them rather than days. I tend to find that the music that tends to resonate with people the most is that type of music I write, that I don't spend, in some cases, years on music, which I
Mm.
have done in the past. But it's something that's very sporadic, and obviously that goes back to the different styles that I tend to write in. They tend to be sporadic as well. But that seems to be my nature when I approach it. So maybe it is that light bulb moment, and you suddenly sit down and you write something, and it kind of all works. But yes, I mean that entire album, or it's an EP actually. Like I said, it was kind of conceived and written very quickly, and that's how I tend to work, and it tends to be the way that I can connect with people through my music, is that it's very simple, but in some ways, it feels like an extension of me. So, and what I'm trying to say.
I would love to touch upon that idea of extension of you, and the idea of simple also is like in life, the truest, deepest things are not so complex always, like the desire for love or the desire for belonging or trying to find our path. And, it's not, there's something very pure and very that hits you deeply when it's um, got that simple flow. And the fact that you're able to do it in almost like a flow state where you kind of get into that zone and you just kind of pour it out. And it's not using, like we were talking about before, about the cognitive, um, analytical part of ourselves that might want to break down all the beats and just kind of letting it come out. There's a quote that I love. I actually wrote a blog. A name of my blog when I was younger was called Quill of the Soul. And the reason I had that name was there was a Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement. And he said, speech is the pen of the heart, but a melody, music, is the quill of the soul. It what words can't accomplish, because words to me are our best effort, a poor ability to give over how we're feeling and what we're thinking to people. Um, do you find that your music is a clearer form of self-expression sometimes than even we can get to know you better than even you talking to us, or is it just different?
Yes, I that's a very interesting question. So I would say it's I wouldn't say. I mean, I'm a fairly expressive person, and what I'm like in daily life. I think there are some people who know me and don't necessarily know what I do for a job, and I don't tend to walk around saying, "Oh, hey, I'm a musician. I do this. I do that." So in some ways, my everyday life is very different from the music that I write. So I think of my music as almost like a part of me, but not all of me. Music is something that you write yourself, but then you put it out, and it then belongs to the person who's listening to it at any given time. So although I've put my stamp on it and I've written it, going back to the way that people derive meaning from it, I think I think it doesn't people don't necessarily need to know who's written the music in order to enjoy it, and therefore, in terms of thinking of it as an extension of me, in some ways I do, and in some ways I don't, because the music is what it is, and it's interpreted by people in the way they want to interpret it, and I feel like daily life, in some ways, doesn't really it's it doesn't really have a part of my music, because daily life is kind of daily life, and the way you talk to people and treat people and people perceive you is very much to do with what you're doing on a daily basis and who you're coming into contact with, and it's like your family, for instance. You may be, like I said, I grew up with my family, and I tend to be my parents' son, and that's what I am to them. I'm not necessarily, or my music isn't necessarily an embodiment of me. They just
Mm.
know me as me. So maybe I made that all a bit more confusing, but I just feel like music is a part of me, but it's not necessarily a complete representation of me, because people are very, very complicated.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And also touching on what we said earlier about kind of channeling this creative energy and letting it kind of come, it's also kind of a gift that's coming through you, but it might even be beyond you in a way. Like it's not your everyday self interacting with people. It's coming from a deeper place that you're not working from in the middle of the day at the supermarket. It's another element of you. Do you find I imagine before quarantine you were able to play some live shows or even virtual, but in person live shows. What's that experience like? Do you feel a connection to your audience, or are you more focused on just producing the music at hand? You're so caught up in that part of it.
That's a good question. So I mean, when I perform, I mean, you're invested in your work, so in some ways you are sat there trying to give the best representation of your own work that you possibly can. So you're kind of worrying about that at the time you're giving it. It depends on the audience as well and where you are. So that is, I mean, it depends because you may have people who have never heard music like yours before and may not know how to interpret it. And on the flip side of that, you may be in a well-established place that already puts on artists like you, so you're going to have a different audience, you know, responding to your music in a different way. They might know what to look for or interpret what you're doing because, you know, when I perform, I'll play some piano. I will move over to the laptop and what looks like to most people kind of fiddle around on the laptop and they won't see what you're doing. I try to make it as tangible as possible to people so they can see what I'm doing, because a lot of it is kind of sound manipulation as well. So if you can make that as visual as possible, that helps. So that helps people to kind of connect with the music because they can see, oh yes, you're twiddling that knob and that's making that sound change in that particular way. So for me, when I'm sat there playing music, you know, I'm aware that people are there, and then there are moments where you think, oh, I played that really well, that was really good, and then maybe you lose concentration, and then it kind of throws you off a bit, and you know, you settle into a rhythm. So every concert is different. You can, if you start and you get something wrong initially, that can affect how you play. So it just depends. I do, you know, I enjoy playing music. I love playing music. It's a different experience sitting in the studio making music than it is being out in the world and being in venues. And it's always nice to have people listen to your music in person, and maybe hear music like that for the first time, and especially people who didn't realize that this sort of music exists. Or just exists in spas, or you know, they hear that type of music, but there's actually a you know, a very vibrant world around this. So it's nice to introduce music to people as well. So it depends where I'm playing, who I'm playing with, but every experience is always good, and I do really enjoy playing live.
Love it. I love it. Do you what kind of artists are like for me, I put you I don't know if I'm pronouncing them right. Siguros from Iceland, and M83. There's a few highlights for me. Who do you get inspiration from? Who do you like?
Well, I mean, I'm in a position where a lot of the people who have inspired me over the years, I actually know, which is a very strange position to be in. So this really all kicked off at university when I was at university, and I started listening to people like Sigur Rós. Now I don't know Sigur Rós, but then you know, I started to listen to more independent artists who were just starting at the time. So people like maybe a Keith Kenneth, who is Goldman, if you know him. So you know, his first couple of albums I really started listening to, and then you know, I've ended up working in the same world and knowing these people. So you know, I'm lucky to not only be able to interact with the people that that first inspired me to start creating music, but to be able to ask them questions and feel part of a community that you know, I really enjoy being part of, and that has really helped me over the years. So yes, you know, I derive lots of inspiration from lots of different artists, and I'm maybe talking about a small section of the music that I listen to, but it is directly correlated to the music I make. So yeah, I mean, so Sigur Rós, fantastic band. You know, they're everyone's first go to when you think of kind of that style of music. But yeah, there's, you know, being close to London as well really helped, because I was able to go to very early concerts for Nils Frahm, Olaf Ronalds, so people that your listeners may or may not know. But they're quite big artists now, and I remember going to, you know, very small gigs and you know, getting to know these people and talking to them, and that really helped too. So you know, I'm in that lucky position that the people who I was taking inspiration from I actually No. So
That's so cool. I'm actually taking notes so I can have new music to listen to as well. Clem Leek is my go-to, and then the others, Sigur Rós and those, look to after. What was Radiohead an influence at all?
yes, I suppose it was. Yeah, I wouldn't think it was a direct influence, but I did listen to a lot of Radiohead, mostly the later stuff actually, which is interesting. I will absorb all sorts of music, and so there are things that I could mention that you think, well, that doesn't sound anything like his music. But when you listen to music and you think, oh, what are they doing that I'm not able to do? It's almost listening to music in recognition that a certain artist is better at something that you are, and how can you learn from that? So yeah, Radiohead I listened to a lot when I was
Some
younger.
some gangster rap in Clem
Oh,
Leek's
all
next
the
album.
time, all the time.
The streets, the streets.
The streets, yes, yeah. That's yeah. I mean, you absorb everything, so maybe somewhere along the line, the streets have figured in my music at some point. But yeah, I mean, there's it's music is a very wide and patchwork experience, and even if you're just pulling from a musician that's completely different from you in maybe the way they work in the studio, or literally a sound that they've used in a record, and you think that is amazing. You can as long as you're open to listening to things as a musician, anything can inspire you. And so yeah, it's I guess that's music.
That's how cool is it to have a job or a vocation that you can pull inspiration from anywhere that you're taking from. I mean, I guess there's many in that. Like my father as a doctor, he says that the reason he enjoys his profession is that he never masters it. There's always new things to learn about the body, and new. It's a little different than pulling inspiration from everywhere to do your work, but I think that's really cool. I feel the same way about what I do in that I'm able to I learn and get inspired from so many things in the world, and I can apply that to living a better life, to how we can learn from a tree, we can learn from nature, we can learn from people. And there's a in Ethics of Our Fathers, is a 2,000-year-old book. It says, who is wise? The one who learns from everything and from everyone. It's not the one who's really smart. It's the one who's open to learning from everything that they see and everyone that they meet. um, and I forgot where I was reading this, regarding how before the soul comes down to a body in the Kabbalistic teachings, there's an idea that communication is song. Like the angels communicate through song. It's not talking like we do. And in this life, we gravitate to that frequency of communication because that is what we inherently um, vibe towards. And it makes sense because when we talk to each other, especially social media arguments about politics and things like that, it the heart and the mind and the soul get lost in translation, and we get stuck with this outer form of communication. And then when I go to a music festival or a concert, all of a sudden I see every stripe and color and walk of life person getting along together in a song that they can all connect with. Maybe sports would be the other example, but I think music is unique in life. It's a gift that it allows us to unite with something that our higher selves feel resonates, not the lower level things we argue about, but on a higher place, we're all the same. I think we need that today more than ever.
Yes, I agree with you on that. Yeah, I think that um, music is kind of for want of a better phrase, a unifying force. It's in the people who are making it can be political, but the music itself, unless it's individually, political in itself.
Sure.
I would feel on a personal level, my music is apolitical. It is what it is. I don't use a lot of vocals or singing. I have done, and so it is the sounds themselves. And it depends. It does. In fact, it doesn't matter who you are or how you've come to listen to my music. It is it my music is my music, and it's supposed to be enjoyed in the way that you decide to enjoy it. So yes, it's a nice neutral ground, without the stresses and strains of daily life. I think so. Yes,
A
it's a
a safe place that people can come to, regardless of what they're going through. It's amazing that you can create that for us. So, with everything going on with with COVID and quarantine, and what's next for you? What are you? How are you looking at the future and the present? What can we find from Clem Leek going forward? Do you think?
yeah. I mean, there are a few things I've just released. I mentioned earlier a record with Mark Peters for the thesis project, and that was really enjoyable. We actually worked on that over the summer, and that was nice. He's back in the UK, and so we were able to kind of work remotely, and that was great. Really enjoyed that. And Gregory, who is in charge of the thesis project, has been fantastic. I am releasing some recordings in a few months, some stripped down versions of my latest album. I did release an album this year as well, so I'm still chugging along and making some music. Although this summer has been a little bit more lean creatively for me. I don't know, whether it's been the pandemic or maybe just the stresses of the situation. I find that when I have least stress, I tend to be my most creative. I Obviously for some people, music is kind of an escape. So it's that again is kind of a paradox for me. It's interesting. Because I would imagine that the first thing I go to is music, but sometimes if I feel stressed, it's the last thing I go to because I don't want to project that into my music. So yeah, and really, it's interesting. I keep going back to that light bulb moment that you mentioned earlier because it's fascinating to me. I've felt over this period the one thing that has come across is that I'd quite like to get back to that light bulb moment, that pure inspiration. So in some ways, it's a an approach to get there. So I'm actually thinking maybe I'm thinking too much about it. But yes, I'm trying to set myself up for maybe one of those light bulb moments again, where suddenly inspiration strikes and I write a new album in 20 minutes. I don't know. So yes, in terms of music, I'm certainly concentrated on using these moments to have a rebirth, like we were talking earlier, in terms of my music. And also, in a general sense, as with most people, thinking about life going forward, how you interact with your family, how you spend time with them, how can you make the most of every moment, because as we know, things can be put on hold for various reasons, and this wasn't a reason we were expecting. So, how can you adapt your life going forward to make sure you're making the most of your time, making the most of your relationships, and making sure that you're available to other people as well, open, accessible to people. So if something like this happens again, which who knows, it may do, then you've changed for the next time that we go into something like this. Or it won't necessarily be a pandemic, but I'm sure there's going to be tests, whether it be personal or global, down the line, and it's about making those changes, I think.
I agree 100%. I was reading a statistic of somebody who, my grandmother's 95, and someone like that, I think she was born just after World War One. But if you imagine someone born in the early 1910s, they would have gone through World War One, the Great Depression, World War Two, and it's not to minimize our generation's struggles because I don't believe in this. Oh, a depressed millionaire who cares. Everyone has their struggle, and ours is also difficult. But I just think like sometimes our generation we're a bit pampered in what goes on, and these things. The goal of life is to grow. The goal of life is to challenge yourself, experience discomfort, and grow through that experience as best you can. Of course, we have to support each other through all that. But I was thinking of the analogy. I think I heard it from a rabbi of mine regarding a seed planted in the ground. When you see a seed buried in the ground, stifled in the ground, you think that it's going to die, it's going to rot. And instead, it almost nullifies itself. It starts to close in, and then it births. The seed births and starts to grow. And if it's watered right and treated right, it grows into this beautiful tree. And I think right now, many of us feel buried. We feel like we're kind of stuck indoors in many levels, and also physically, we're stuck. And if we treat it right, if we if we use this time in a way of what you and I were talking about before, rebirth, of how can I use this as a time to think about how I want to go moving forward? Perhaps we can, and learn the lessons from it. We can grow from this into, the tree that we're trying to become in our lives. And I think my prayer, my hope is that you, I, and all of us will be able to come out of this experience stronger, with more clarity, and as you said, ready to deal with all the challenges that life will always throw at us. Obviously, as a believing person, as a rabbi, I believe that nothing's by chance. That the fact you and I are talking right now, the fact that we've gone through what the world has gone through, a virus that's minute in a market in Asia can somehow change the whole complexity of the world. And if we look at it as not life as not being haphazard, as something that's happening, to me, but is happening for me, is coming to help me get to where I need to get to. I think it helps me at least with the randomness. I don't think challenges is the most painful thing. I feel like it's not knowing why, or feeling there's no why. That's the real pain. A woman in childbirth, as excruciating as it is, the idea that this is going to birth something beautiful and meaningful, I think is what takes, I wouldn't know, but is what takes a woman through that experience. And if we can look at life that way, that this isn't happening just to screw me over, it's coming to somehow take the world and myself to a more advanced place. I think that's very helpful for me personally.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think most people who grow end up going through some sort of pain, whether it be personal, whether it be on a larger scale, like things are now. People are made up of their experiences. I suppose maybe the question is how much people learn from their experiences, and whether they have the ability to be able to act and change. And I think, for personally, I feel that whilst this has been incredibly difficult, I've always felt kind of that I'm a fairly realistic person. So like you derive meaning and understanding that everything happens for a reason. I think personally, you know, things like this do happen, and whether it be like again, whether it be personal or whether it be on a larger scale, life is not easy. I've the thing I hope is that for someone who is able to deal with this sort of situation, at least I feel in a reasonably okay way. I feel like this period has been difficult, but I feel personally I've been able to overcome it in whatever way you can do. How to help others be able to do the same thing, and that's not so much of a boast to say, "Hey, look at me! I've been able to work my way through this." But everyone is unique, and they have their own struggles and challenges. And sometimes, personally, I find it frustrating that I'm not able to help people through these things or help them to understand. So I suppose as a rabbi, you must find that on a much larger scale. So maybe that's the thing that I'm going to take from this, is that I can be more understanding of other people's challenges and maybe find more effective ways to help them with anything they're going through. And likewise, if someone sees that I'm struggling, then they can help me in a more effective way. So I don't know whether that made sense, but it's just I suppose everyone will learn their own lesson from this situation and be able to take what they want from this situation as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you touched on a beautiful point about you looking at it as a time where I can help those that need it. And when we focus on what help I can be, if we only focus on our internal happiness and success, when that's not being met, which will happen often in life, we will be sad. We will be sad. If we focus on also what role do I play in this world and how can I be of service, there's always a need. There's always a place for that. And we move outside of our own ego and our own mind and our own fixations. It really opens us up to more happiness, I believe. And when you were talking, I feel remiss not to talk about Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was the chief rabbi of England, and he passed away on Shabbat, on Saturday, 2 days ago. And he said many beautiful things. And I just want to, what you just said really, really made me think of it. He was not at all planning to be around. He was studying philosophy at Cambridge. And in 1968, when he was 20 years old, he went to New York to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In my picture there behind me is the Rebbe there. He was a very special rabbi who lived from 1902 to 1994. And when he visited him, he asked him a lot of philosophical questions about life, and the Rebbe answered. And then he says that the Rebbe, I have the quote here. He asked the Rebbe asked him, "What's going on with Jewish life on campus at Cambridge? Like, are students involved? Is there anything for them?" And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was at the time. He wanted to give an excuse why he's not very involved in life on campus. And he said, "In the situation that I find myself," and before he could finish, the Rebbe interrupted him mid sentence and said, "Nobody finds themselves in a situation." He says, "You put yourselves in a situation, and if you put yourself in that situation, you can always put yourself in another situation." And Rabbi Sachs realized, basically, he said like that. He said, "A good leader creates followers, but a great leader creates leaders." And he talked about it. He just devoted his life to helping people and building bridges. And this idea that I wouldn't say that COVID is something we put ourselves in at all. I didn't mean it like that, but more like we can decide reality is as it is, and then we create how that will play itself out. What's our life going to be like within that kind of square, that box that we've been put into, and to take action and to try and make a difference. I know I led a meditation on IGTV on Instagram. There were 1,000 people that ended up watching it over time, and I had your music as a background. And without you even knowing it, you're inspiring 1,000 people like that. Um, I think I messaged you. Do you mind if I play it? And I like posted it before I even got there. So I apologize. We'll have to get you some. We got to get some royalties to Clem. No question about that. We need to get your album, your music. People need to check you out. You've got such beautiful stuff out there that you've put a lot of effort into. And where can we find you? Where can we have access to your stuff?
Well, I mean, so we were talking about this earlier that my name is quite unique. So if you were to search Clem, Clem, and then last name Leek, Leek, then you will likely get to me, whether it be via my website or whether it be on Spotify or whether it be on any musical outlet. I'm obviously on all the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm on each one to a varying degree, but yes, I am available, and you can learn about me via those channels. I tend to be quite an open person, so if you want to message me and ask me some questions about my music or talk to me about it, that'd be great. I love talking to people about my music, and about other things too. I mean, feel free to to talk to me about anything. So yes, yeah, feel free to Google me, I suppose, as the phrase goes. And I will say, if people do want to learn more, my mailing list, I've made a point to send them out sparingly because I know that everyone's mailbox is very full all of the time. But you can go to clemleek.com and join my mail list there. If you would like some information on my music, maybe once a month or once every 2 months. I tend to send out some information that way. So because I know there tends to be a lot of information on Instagram and Facebook, and we're information overload. So I try to keep it as minimal as possible. So yep, and Spotify as well. If you have Spotify, just search me and I will pop up.
I love the way you described my father. I can say it because I'm American. He says Americans speak when the sentence should be over. So I feel like the brevity of your emails being once every few weeks, no matter how much you send them, I'm sure we'll enjoy receiving them. And thank you for being so open to connect with all of us. I think a quote from Rabbi Sachs, my favorite quote that I want to share in honor of him about, and is connected to music. He says that of course it is possible to live a life without God, just as it is possible to live a life without humor or music or love. And one can no more prove that God exists than one can prove that these other things exist to those who lack a sense of humor, or to whom Schubert is mere noise, or love a figment of the romantic imagination. And it's, it's such a beautiful way to express the ineffable. I mean, we have an impossible job, religious leaders, if you're speaking to a pure rationalist, somebody, to talk about an experience, a spiritual experience, very difficult. But um, it's I'm not sure I know Schubert, his music. I'm guessing a classical composer, but um, listening to your music and thinking it is just noise, it would be an impossibility for me. And I want to thank you for putting out the effort. You should know, in your own little world of creation music, not knowing what's going on out there, it definitely touches the lives of many, and has touched my life in giving me inspiration, in really um, giving a voice to certain, I would say, feelings and uh, spiritual experiences for me personally, that really connects to what you've created, and enables it to come out and to blossom. So thank you for that.
Well, absolutely. I want to say thank you to you because without people such as yourself, I would be unable to get myself out there and talk to people who usually wouldn't hear my music, or maybe might come across my music because of this conversation. So it gives me great joy to be able to communicate with people who my music does mean something to. It really, I very much appreciate personal interaction and organic relationships. And I suppose in some ways there's nothing more organic about me than my music, because, like we said, it's a part of me. And so for someone to appreciate that part of me and then seek me out and want to know more that's an honor for me. So it's an absolute pleasure to speak to you, and also I hope your listeners have enjoyed today. Sometimes you said about Americans talking when the sentences are over. Sometimes I do the same thing, and podcasts tend to be a place where I do that. So I'm sorry if I've waffled a bit today, but I've really enjoyed today. So thank you so much.
It's been an absolute honor having you on. You did not waffle. You were fantastic, and thank you for taking the time. Something I'll be working on for a few months, and I appreciate you taking the time and making it happen.
Of course, of course. Thank you.
Everyone, check out Clem Leek immediately.
Yes, do it now.